up on them. It said the Union sat there and had Sharps rifles. Okay, we'll get to it in a second. And they repulsed them. So it only took them a couple seconds. They got up in line, they fired a volley and pushed them back. And so we know that the Union's armed with Sharps rifles. At the end of the book, you remember, like again, we know that the Union lost that engagement, and they said they captured like 200 Sharps rifles, 406 shooters, and all these other things in stores and wares and everything. And then also what the weapons they had. Now, the gun that Jake has is probably more common of what you're going to see in all Civil War battlefields. This is not just here, but this is an Enfield. What's neat about this gun is an Enfield's a British gun. Well, how in the world are we getting this? Other than the Springfield, the Enfield is the most common weapon on the field at the time. It's actually a very good weapon. It's a very accurate weapon. And to get through this, actually get Enfields here, that means they had to run through the blockade, which remember the Union had a blockade around all the ports. And so these guns would have had to beat that and make their way up through those ports and get in the hands of these troops that were here. So it is a full-sized weapon, lock, stock, and barrel that's on it. So your lock here, let me trade you for just a second. So your lock here just makes it go off, your stock, and obviously your barrel. Now this is a percussion system, so it fires a percussion cap. So it's very simple, looks like Abraham Lincoln's hat. You put that on top and it's primed, that's it. So it's as simple as that. Now the big thing about this weapon is the barrel. Say prior to the weapons they would have had before this, would have been smooth, just as much smooth on the inside as the outside, which would mean they would have been unrifled, like a shotgun basically, not very accurate. So that type of weapon shaped their type of warfare. So if you see them line up like we did here, if you guys are infantry, you line up shoulder to shoulder, right? We walk across big open fields, and I'd shoot at you and you'd shoot at me. It's the gentlemanly thing to do, right? And we all die in great numbers for our country. Awesome.
Napoleonic.
Yeah, Napoleonic style. I mean, this idea of, again, lining up, because their weapons were super inaccurate. They had to fire like that. They had to rank up like that in order to hit anybody across the field. What changed, one, I'm now going to have rifling grooves inside this barrel. But if I'm going to put a round ball down there, I need this to fit in there very tightly for that to go off. What changed was the ammunition. So instead of a round ball, I'm now shooting a conical ball. It looks like the top of it looks like the head of a football. Okay, so it's conical, and the bottom of it is concave. It's called a Minet or mini ball, as we call it here in the United States. And what happens is when this sets off and the main powder explodes, that little concave bottom is going to push out and gauge those rifling grooves and put a spiral on the bullet. So no longer am I accurate at 50 to 100 yards, say, with a smoothbore weapon. These right here are steeped up to 900 yards. And so I'm basically fighting the exact same way, but I'm now using a 900-yard sniper rifle. Okay, you see the problem with this? Okay, so the fact that they had these guns, these are not bad weapons. I guess they were just not taken care of very well. Remember the hand-me-downs? You see that in a lot of Confederate soldiers out here in the West. They got the junk. They were not riding around in yellow striped suits if they were in the cavalry and looking all good with their fancy shiny sabers. Notice he's got his big knife. Okay, you see a lot of guys, the Battle of Van Buren, they talk about them going through the camp and they said they all had these huge knives, and that's what they're carrying. So a lot of the Union though, I'm federal issue, I've got all my set stuff. I'll come back to the saber here in a minute. But again, these guys are riding around with full-length rifles. Not a great weapon for horseback, because if you can imagine loading this, so before I prime it, I'll take my gunpowder, powder, pad, everything out, put it inside here, ram this down. Imagine doing this on horseback while you're getting shot at and trying to direct the horse. And then putting back, priming with that little bitty thing and that little bitty cone, and then firing a weapon accurately. Good luck. There's a reason so many of those guys were using shotguns, and there's a reason that they were hitting like that. Remember they said they rode up, they'd fire. They'd rode up, they'd fire. And so the Union had a lot better weapons than this. Remember at the end of the engagement, they said that they were actually able to capture a lot of these weapons, and they were super happy about it. If you read the newspaper reports at the end, or the fish reports, they mentioned these sharks 5 or 6 times because they were so happy to get them. They were just tickled pink. So same exact thing inside the barrel, except my lock is different. So how this works, my trigger guard would then drop down, exposing, this is a breech loader. So now I'm gonna load my cartridge right in the back of this instead of actually going through the top. This is not a muzzle loader, it's a breech loader. So I take my cartridge out, I push it inside. When I close this, it acts like a big cigar cutter and actually cuts off the back of the cartridge, exposing the gunpowder. So I don't have to do it with my teeth anymore. The gun does it for me. So I close that up, powder's exposed, and then I still have to put a percussion cap on it and done. Little ring on the side, I missed a piece of my equipment. I should have a strap across my chest that actually clips onto this. But this would actually keep my gun on me. I forgot it, I'm sorry guys. but it's a clip that you'll see that just clips right on here, and it clips on my right side. So I can still use it, fire it, let it drop. And if my horse does something stupid, gets hurt or whatever, my horse is bucking, I can just let it go. There's a little socket that's on the side of my saddle the barrel would fit down inside of, so it would actually keep it semi-steady as I'm riding around. Don't forget to do that. I did that one time when we were reenacting, and this thing, I watched it slide up in the air, and I'm making eye contact with it as it goes whack and hits my leg, and it'll bruise the crud out of you. Anyways, but when you load this and fire this, it's very quick. It's much faster than this. It's much, we'll see how reliable it is here in a minute when we go off and fire a couple rounds. But at the same time, what's neat about this weapon, again, it's 100% meant for horseback firearm. It's so short. It's not this big, giant, long thing. You did have full-length rifles. Sharps did come out with a lot of these sporting rifles and sniper rifles for the Union, but this is 100% made for cavalry for horseback firing. So in the manual, you'll see the guys, they go by, they hold their weapon, they fire it, and they're only told to hold with these two fingers, with my thumb, my forefinger. Why is that? What am I doing with these other three?
Steadying it?
That's my reins. So I'm shooting with this hand, I'm riding with this hand. In the cavalry, when you rope nowadays, everything you're riding is with your left hand. Your right hand is free. Everybody's right-handed in the military, okay? So holding with this, shooting with this, I've got my reins in this hand. I can sit there and direct him everything I need him to do with these three fingers while I'm holding the gun with that and holding it with this hand. So they would train them to only fire with these two fingers on the front end. Isn't that kind of neat?
Yeah. Very neat.
I do parties afterwards. So that's basically how these weapons work. I'll go through and do a load 9 times if you want to demonstrate that, and then we'll go up and see if we can fire at the same time. You'll see the kind of the difference between these rapid fire. So I'm gonna have Jake form up over on the by the tree. We do have a set distance barrier we have to do with the Park Service. So his first order, you got cats and okay, I did get it to you. Okay, so the first order will be to load 9 times. Load. You place that in front of him. Handle cartridge. He's got a cool cartridge box there in the back. And that would be paper and the ball and everything all wrapped up into one. Very good. Tear cartridge. You gotta have teeth in the army. Charge cartridge. You can put that all the way down there at the bottom. And again, imagine doing this on horseback and trying to get all your powder inside. Okay. Draw a rammer. Nice smooth movement. Ram cartridge. Return rammer. And you have to return your rammer. Shoulder, arm. And the reason you have to return rammer is if you don't, you'll have an awesome spear that you can shoot down the range, but then you can't shoot your gun anymore. So prime. So when the gun's loaded at this point, he's going to take that percussion cap out, place it on the cone, and when he's done that, he's ready to go. Ready, aim, and fire. That's simple, right? Super simple. Super easy. Now, I'm going to go through mine. Thank you, Jake. You can stay up here because we're going to go through this.
Not that the noise. Not that the noise excites me. Look at the difference. Look at the difference.
So I put that round in there, it cut off for me, I'm primed, and that's it. I'm ready to shoot. That's all. I don't have to do all those things. Oh. Oh, shush.
That's right.
Is that what that was?
So I have to hold it for 10 seconds. This doesn't fire very loud. It's super easy to unload too. So much quicker with this. And again, imagine doing that on horseback when I'm riding around. I can sit there, pop that open, put it in, close it, do all with one hand while I'm holding this reins with my left hand. Okay? So let's go through a loading process real quick. My gun doesn't misfire, and we'll see how fast it goes. We'll go slow.
He misfired again.
He misfired again.
He wins the day, any way you look at it.
Lay down.
Yeah.
That's why y'all got routed. That's right. So, it's not a perfect system by any stretch of the imagination. When the gun does go off, no. I've had to replace this cone a couple of times, and now it's apparently getting me twisted. There's a reason. Good job.
Same company as our cannon prime place.
That's right. Me. That's my fault. So, when the gun does go off, it's a good system. When it works right, again, you can fire it from horseback. So when these guys were able to capture these by the hundreds, they were super happy about it. So again, imagine riding around on horseback and fighting something like this. Again, a reliable weapon when it does go off, not to mention the modern stuff. But at the same time, getting these guns for these guys, when they stopped and captured these weapons, they were super happy about it. And so much so, like, we're overdressed, both of us. Now me, I'm overdressed because I'm not in my underwear, but I didn't think anybody wanted to see me in my underwear. So here we are.
Thank you.
I should have walked right out of the tent, remember, grabbed my stuff, and went right back at it. Jake's overdressed because look how nice his uniform is, and I'm not knocking him. The reason being is you read the reports, remember it said that they were like really badly and poorly dressed. And when they went through the middle of the camp, what they do? They stopped in the middle of the fight to go and start stealing clothes, because they said they requested pants, shirts, underwear, socks, and they said for decency reasons. So these guys were riding around lacking some clothing items. So he would be a very well-dressed Confederate at that time. But again, when we talked about it, we were joking about it, I'm like, you should go barefooted with no shirt, and I'll come in my underwear, and then we'll look like we did during this fight. But again, for you guys' sake, because we care about you, we couldn't do it. The other weapon that you see them talk about is the revolvers. They said that, remember at the end of the battle, they said they got 200 sharps. They were super happy. And they got 400 six-shooters. They didn't say what, and more than likely it would have been a Colt like one of these. So Colt had a couple of different weapons that they would have used, and by far the most common handgun as far as revolvers go on the Civil War battlefield would have been a Colt revolver. So what Jake has here is, believe it or not, a Colt ripoff of one of the Confederates did. Notice the brass frame compared to, say, this case hardened frame. Brass is cheaper, easier to get. So what the Confederates would do is they'd make copies of these Colt weapons. They were so good, and they would use brass for the frames. You didn't see them super common, but you did see them on the battlefield. So they'd have been lucky if they'd had one of those, but they were super happy to get to steal a bunch of those from 6 Kansas guys.
Are these cartridge weapons?
These are cap and balls. So how this works, it's a very slow weapon to load, but a very fast weapon to shoot. So how this works, I'll spin the cylinder. Notice it's got that cool engraving on the side. And what this is the battle of the Texas Navy versus the Mexican Navy in the Mexican War. Colt thanked Texas for saving his firearms. In 1836, he makes his first revolver. In Patterson, New Jersey, it was called the Patterson model. It was a 5-shooter, oddly enough. And went off, neat little gun, missing the trigger guard, 36 caliber, pretty underpowered for the most part. But Texas bought a bunch of them. And so he was just gone out of out of business, basically. He'd gone bankrupt right there for the Mexican War. Mexican War pops up, and they start producing more guns, much larger guns at the time. And he thanked Texas for that. He really liked Texas. It made him a lot of money. So that engraving on the side looks cool, but he also was a copyright issue. There were so many people that were copying his guns that he bought a thing called a Ormsby's Grammograph that rolled a scene on there on this thing, on the cylinder. And so if you saw a gun that looked like this, that didn't have that engraving, it was a copyright infringement, and he could sue that company. And so that's why he did it. It wasn't for looks. It was for copyright reasons. So how this works is I would take my powder, I would take the ball, put it inside the cylinder on top here. It spins. I would go all the way around, load 6 of those, and instead of the ramrod, it's built onto the gun. And so as I turn this, I would press these down one at a time, press them down, and then I still have to put little small percussion caps in the back, little pistol-sized percussion caps in the back of this, and then I'm loaded. It's slow to load, but then I've got 6 rounds. So pretty great gun. Again, a lot of these guys are rolling around with U.S. military captured weapons after this, so they were super happy to get these guns. So the reason I want to talk about this is the fact that, yes, it's fun to shoot guns when they go off, but when we're out here actually doing it, imagine these guys fighting. These are not antiquated weapons. These are not old flintlocks. These are not junk guns. The time they got on this field, they are fighting with the best firearms on earth at this time. Nobody in Europe, nobody around the world had a better gun than a Sharps. Nobody in the world had probably better long arms than the British. So the fact that they were fighting with these weapons on an open field is pretty substantial. So the idea they actually didn't have more casualties is surprising to me, considering how bad it was. So that's it. We can go back
What
inside there.
caliber